Looks like we are live now. Yes?
I think we are.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for logging.
I would unplug your headphones, Jill.
What?
I would unplug your headphones. I think it's your headphones are giving you some feedback.
I have to have my headphones. I can have separate. Is that better?
That's great. Yeah.
Okay, great. It was that external thing.
Oh.
Now you're muted. If you unplug again, we'll be able to hear you. You got muted somehow.
There's a good comment in the bottom.
What does it say?
It says what I'd like to say to DJT.
Now you're muted.
We can't hear you now, no.
Yeah.
Hover over Jill's video, make sure her mic is on and her sound is off.
Oh, this is terrible.
There you go. There you go.
There you are.
You can hear me now?
Yeah.
Does anybody have studio sound on? No.
Okay. For the sake of time, I'm going to begin and hope for the best. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Welcome. Thank you for tuning in.
Just so everybody knows, we're in charge of the North Carolina vote counting. we paused to bring you this live update.
This is just a continuation of 2020. I am Jill McCorkle and honored to be here. A huge thanks to Flyleaf Books, Talia and Jamie for hosting this event for us. All across the country this afternoon, these conversations are happening through the great generosity of independent booksellers. And tonight at 8 p.m., the conversation will continue for those who want more. I'll put the link in the chat box, featuring writers Paul Auster, Salman Rushdie, Rebecca Solnit, and Natasha Trethewey, to continue the conversation. That happens at 8 tonight, and in a few minutes I will include the link. But for now, we have our own North Carolina-based all-star cast, and it's a great pleasure to have them all gathered here and in conversation. So I thought I would just give brief bios to each in alphabetical order. Someone just said, oh, they answered the Wiley running the Flyleaf account. And then I will turn it over to the speakers. But a big welcome to you all. Belle Boggs is the author of The Gulf, a novel, The Art of Waiting, and Mattapony Queen stories. The Art of Waiting was a finalist for the PEN Diamondstein Spielvogel Award for the Art of the Essay and was named Best Book of the Year. I'm really abbreviating these bios so we can get to the conversation. But Belle's most recent piece in Slate magazine, which I hope she'll talk a little bit about when that needs to be read by all for sure. Wiley Cash is the New York Times bestselling author of the novels The Last Ballad, A Land More Kind Than Home, and This Dark Road to Mercy. Wiley is a force, like Belle, both in the literary community and the political one as well. I welcome Kerry Haynie, a professor of political science and African American Studies. He directs Duke's Center for the Study of Race, Ethnicity, and Gender in the Social Sciences, and is one of the editors of the journal Politics, Groups, and Identity. Rolling around. That has never happened to me before. Malinda Maynor Lowery is a professor of history at UNC Chapel Hill, maybe if I back up, and director of the Center for the Study of the American South. She's a member of the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina. Her second book, The Lumbee Indians, An American Struggle, was published by UNC Press in 2018. She has also produced documentaries. And Malinda, a pleasure to have you with us. And finally, Jean Nichol, a Boyd Tinsley Distinguished Professor at UNC. He was president of the College of William and Mary, law dean at the University of Colorado, and dean at UNC from 1995 to 2005. He's the author of Indecent Assembly, the North Carolina Legislature's Blueprint for the War Against Democracy and Equality, and The Faces of Poverty in North Carolina, Stories from Our Invisible Citizens, and the Federal Courts. Needless to say, I had hoped that perhaps there would be a little bit more news when we gathered, but it also seems fitting maybe that we are coming together to have this conversation perched in a position with a view in both directions. You know, we're all asking the questions: what just happened? What is on the horizon? What's next? Needless to say, the past 4 years have been turbulent in so many ways, but also within the unrest and turbulence, very important movements have taken shape with the goal of necessary and long overdue change. And yet our country is divided right down the middle, it seems. And I think it's also really important to note that our state is also divided right down the middle. And so I just thought we would begin by hearing from each of our speakers, whatever angle you want to take in this moment. I said before when we were in the green room, we want to say limbo, purgatory. Where are we right now, and what should we be looking at in the future? Belle, I'll start with you.
Thank you so much, Jill, for bringing us together, and thank you all for being here. I really appreciate being able to gather with these writers and with everyone who's here. I guess I'm going to tell a little story about something that happened to me recently and to my daughter in our attempts to organize in the state of North Carolina. And I guess I would just start by saying that I feel heartbroken for North Carolina because we had some losses. I mean, we've hung on to some important people and some important races, but we've also, we are a very voter suppressed state. And as these other writers can speak to better than I can, but I would say since I've lived in North Carolina since 2006, and I became more of a participant in local organizing and get out the vote efforts in about 2012. I live in Chatham County, But I usually do my canvassing and door knocking and phone banking in Alamance County, which is the county right next to me, in part because I was a teacher in Alamance County, and also in part because Chatham just has a whole lot of Democratic organizers. Well, Alamance has some amazing organizers too within the Black Lives Matter movement. And so last week, I had been following this planned march in Graham, North Carolina, led by the Reverend Gregory Drumright and the coalition of the Revolutionary Love Coalition in Alamance County. And I published a piece about a week ago about this march, which was intended to honor the victims of police brutality across the country, especially George Floyd's family, as George Floyd was born in North Carolina, and his murder was felt so deeply by people across the state and in little places, smaller towns and cities like Graham. And this was a nonpartisan, get out the vote, anti-police brutality march. And I provided some background in my article, which was a reported piece, and about Alamance County and the all Republican county commissioners who remain in power as of today, or it's still a five-person Republican, all Republican majority in that group of county commissioners. And so my daughter and I went back to the march on Halloween. She's been with me to many marches and protests, and this was a march that was intended to head to the Confederate monument that these activists have been asking to be relocated from outside of the courthouse. And then we were going to accompany people and march with them or push with them to the polls. So this was the last day of early voting in North Carolina. It was a very peaceful march where the roads were blocked off, started with a prayer. Everyone said, we have no weapons. We're not here to tear any monuments down. We marched and made our way in about 25 minutes to the courthouse, and we knelt for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And very shortly after that, with a minimal warning, and this was with the streets blocked off by a police escort, we were either tear gassed or pepper sprayed with a pepper spray fog. There were many children at this event. There were also elderly people. There was a woman in a wheelchair. There were people with canes, etc. And we were all overcome with this cloud of pepper spray. And I tell this story just to say that what concerns me the most and what I feel the most heartbroken about is the idea that voting or that getting out the vote or that engaging with the political process at the local level is something that we now have come to think of as partisan. I work as a professor at a university in this fine state, a very fine university, and I love my job dearly. I love my students. I posted my article to our listserv because I thought that people might want to know, and this is research that I'm doing right now about Alamance County. It was a reported piece, and I included the graduate students too, because this is about, in my mind, nonpartisan issues, getting out the vote and opposing police brutality. And I was told, please don't use our university resources to share political action. And what is political action now? Political action is counting all the votes. Political action is going to the polls and making sure that everybody votes. That is what I feel heartbroken about. And even though I'm upset that my daughter was tear gassed. She's 6 years old, by the way. She's 6, and there were other children there who were much younger. There were babies in strollers, etc. But I am glad that we are having these conversations about what it means and what it should mean to live in a democracy. And I'm glad to be a member of a coalition of people that is for everybody voting, right? That when we go and when we try to get out the vote, we try to get out everybody's vote, because that's in all of our interests. So that's what I have to say.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Belle. And again, the original piece appeared in Slate magazine, and then you did a follow-up with them post, yes, which is a very powerful piece. Wiley.
There we go. Thank you for that, Belle. That was it's a great piece of writing and a terrifying story. And to think of your little girl experiencing that as a father of 2 little girls myself is just heartbreaking. One thing that I've been thinking a lot about is, this is a pretty clear event, Writers Against Trump, which I certainly find myself being. And it's not that I'm so much against Trump, it's that I find myself to be an ethical, practical, sensible person. And everything that he seems to stand for is in direct, opposition to that belief that I have. And I'm reminded of the election in 2016. I remember going into the university where I was teaching, and my students, obviously, the majority of them it was like a wake. I mean, the energy, it was nearly impossible to have a class. And I think I went and picked up bagels or donuts or something, trying to lift their spirits. And I remember telling them, I don't know who said this. Maybe Obama said it. Maybe somebody said it about Obama. I can't remember. But the line, elections have consequences. And I remember that I said that to these 18 to 22 year olds. And I went into this speech about how, America is a great experiment and things swing, and in 4 more years. And as I was talking, I was looking at this audience that I was holding forth in front of. And it was a gay man and a woman of color and all these people who were not me. And the longer I talked, the more I realized that I was telling them things. I was admitting to them that I was the least affected person by this electoral outcome. And I sat with that, and I apologized pretty quickly after when I realized what I was doing. And that being said, the past 4 years have been probably the hardest 4 years, certainly of my adult life. I equate the 2016 election with probably one of the worst things that's ever happened to me. I think that my family, my wife and I, took it harder than the loss of my father, which also happened in 2016. I think the election has had a worse, more devastating effect on my family, given our political differences, than the death of my father, who was like beloved. And I feel like I've been fighting every day. I feel exhausted. I feel, I don't know. I just feel so, both emboldened and self-righteous, but also sad and saddened and beat down. And I think about how I feel, and I think about my students that I was talking to that day, and the many people that I know every day who have always felt this way when they think about democracy, who have always felt this way when they think about the political process. And as horrifying and as heartbreaking and as tragic as the past 4 years have been for me personally, they have been a great awakening to the realities of American politics, of voter suppression, of the loss of these democratic ideals that I've been able to coast on for so many years before this great upheaval. And so I think for me, the past 4 years they haven't been a reset, they've been an awakening. Because so many of my friends, my sister, who lives as a gay woman in Western North Carolina, she's like, look, I knew this was going to happen. Why are you surprised? This has been happening my whole life. Like, nothing about this is an awakening for me. This is just a continuation. And so I feel like the privileged place that I come from, given who I am and the way I've navigated the world, has caused me to do things that I never would have imagined I would have done pre-2016. And I feel like, and I know we're all writers and we're all, for the most part, academics. And so we're used to waiting for things. And I know Belle's got a really well-known, well-received book about the act of waiting for something very different, something very hopeful, hopefully. But I feel like we've just been waiting. We wait for semesters to be over. We wait for the tests to come. We wait for grades to be due. We wait for our books to come out. We wait for our first reviews to come in. And we're so accustomed to waiting. But I've never waited for anything like this. I've never walked this razor line of dread and hope and uncertainty and fear and excitement and doom. And that being said, I'm fortunate that I've only had to spend 4 years waiting for that. And I know that. And I feel like everything I've done, every bit of art I've created since 2016 has come with that understanding, with that realization, with that coming to a consciousness that I certainly didn't possess in 2016. So it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. I'm a bit intimidated given all of your vitas and your bios and your actions. But yeah, that's my piece.
Thank you, Wiley. So well said and powerful. Thank you. We'll turn now to Kerry.
Hi. Good evening. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Is that better?
That's better. Yes, it sounded like you were in a pop band.
And, let me say I'm 57 years old, a native of North Carolina, grew up in Kannapolis, went to first grade in 1969. My class was the first one in Kannapolis City Schools to be fully integrated. I have a brother who's a year older, and his first grade year was an all-Black first grade. I remember going in 1968, it must have been, with my mother to vote for the first time in 1968, and she would have been 29 years old at the time. So it depends on when you enter, right, as to how you, I think, see where we are and what's happened. Just listening to some of the commentary the last few days, I've been, sort of surprised that folks think that it was not a great victory, or if you're a Democrat. Again, just go back 4 years ago and remember where we were 4 years ago, and in between then and now. What happened on Tuesday and still happening, and eventually I think we'll have a result, is major progress, right? If the president is not reelected, I think he won't be, that's big. And the Vice President Biden and Senator Harris, if they win, and I think they will, have rebuilt the so-called blue wall, but they built it on a Black and brown base. The lesson to be learned from this, and I hope progressives learn it, is to do what Stacey Abrams has done. She's owed more credit than anyone for what's happened in the election cycle. She lost her race, and immediately she started to say, oh no, what happened to me, the voter suppression, she was upset, but she went to work. And I said to a friend this morning that I hope we learn that lesson and not the Cliff Notes version of that lesson. Cliff Notes still, I'm showing my age, I guess, where you can cram at the last minute and get a shorthand version. What Stacey Abrams did was she went to work 2 years before the next election. And she went to work trying to get voters and potential voters who were more likely to vote for her side, as opposed to trying to persuade some Reagan Democrats to come home. Maybe we should do that. But the effort that she put was getting more of the voters who are natural allies to come out and vote. And she didn't start in September and October of an election year. And that's been the pattern. She started 2 years in advance. So, Jill, when you opened with the comments that we're divided, I don't know how divided we are in the sense that we're not all in the game. We're not all participating. Because I think there are more of folks who think like me and us who will not have brought into the process. And I hope one lesson from this election and what comes next is the question we're asked to address is that we go to work like Stacey Abrams did 2 years ago, and that we then turn some of these local races to victories as well by going and doing the work and putting in the time and bringing people in who we know are on the sidelines for any number of reasons, bringing them into the game to make a change 2 years from now. And so that's what I'll say. I'm looking forward to some questions. But again, I think it's a positive sign. The fact that North Carolina is still undecided says something about the progress we make. The fact that Georgia looks like Biden may win Georgia, come very close, says something about the progress and what Stacey Abrams and others have done to get us here.
Great. Thank you. Yes, I feel like I need to knock wood right now. Thank you. And Malinda, and of course, I'm being a native of Robeson County myself. I'm very interested in hearing you talk a little bit, about that area as well.
Yeah.
Response.
Well, I'm so glad to be a writer for a few minutes, to be thought of that way and to think like a writer. And so I was thinking, well, what just happened? I just came in from the yard where I was picking pink eye purple hull peas. And I only had enough off of my vines. This is the first year I've ever planted a garden. I didn't know I could. I thought I had a brown thumb. But of course, I have a long line of gardeners, farmers in my family. And picking those pink eye purple hull peas, I was like, why do I have so few? God, these have been in the ground since June, And Kerry, what you just said, Melinda, you cannot grow enough pink eye purple hull peas to feed more than one meal of yourself if you're going to start in June. And I have a lot to say about Robeson County, because in the last few days, somebody asked me, how are you feeling? How do you cope? And I said, well, I feel best when I pray. And I, of course, have a pretty traditional version of that, pretty traditional version of Christianity that I was raised with. I'd say traditional, not necessarily fundamentalist, not traditional in that sense, but a traditional dependence upon words to heal. And so I was like flipping. I never read the Bible unless I can't sleep at night. So I was flipping, and I happened upon the parable of the sower, which Octavia's parable of the sower is also a tremendous source of scripture for me. One of those books that I read and reread and read passages and think about. God has changed. But Monday night, I happened upon the so-called original version, and thinking about those seeds scattered in the fertile ground as opposed to the rocky ground where it flares up, but then it burns out because the roots can't establish, or you sow them in the kind of wasteland and it never goes anywhere. And I have concluded in the last couple of days that it's very hard to be a warrior against white supremacy. It's a lot easier to be a warrior for young people, and to be thinking about young people as, this is why, Belle, your essay and your story was so affecting, thinking about your daughter. Thinking about being a warrior for young people as knowing that the world will not be the same. The world will change. It has changed tremendously. And I don't have to be an optimist to say that. I just have to be a historian. It's inevitable. God has changed. Inevitably, things will change. And so investing our time in those 0 to 40-year-olds might be the best use of things in terms of what happens next. And so, of course, I think a lot about Robeson County, where hopefully everybody knows, the Lumbees went out for Trump just like, just like they, went out for Clinton. I mean, Clinton won that county, won the Lumbee vote by an absolute landslide, maybe even a bigger margin than Trump won this time around. Lumbee's also voted for Obama, and for anybody who's out there that still doesn't believe that that county tells you where the national mood is politically, you just go there, don't bring COVID there. We also have about the third largest, highest degree of COVID spread right now. And it's probably going to just keep getting worse before it gets better. Don't take COVID there. But when you go, I think people will see that Black and brown people in rural North Carolina anyway, are the most progressive voters that we have.
Yep.
And for that population to be fundamentally ignored by the Democratic Party is a shame. Now, where I come from, we're harsh on those we love, right? We believe in telling our loved ones exactly how it is. And so from where, my relatives who voted for Trump and my relatives who can't understand our relatives who voted for Trump and all of our neighbors, people who have died from COVID, who have had household members die from COVID this year, for the Democratic Party to not extend a hand starting in 2016 to that population. First of all, it's an insult to our history, right? Because in North Carolina, unlike African Americans in the state, we were allowed to vote starting after 1903. And so we were disallowed from voting between 1835 and 1867 or 1869. And so, but that 40-ish years of time, 30 so years of time that we were not allowed to vote, that Lumbees were not allowed to vote, has left an indelible marker on our community to the point where we will participate even in a democracy that does not serve us. We will vote for the party of white supremacy rather than not vote. And that 40-year time period between, 1835 and 1860 something, I wish I could remember, was, really a moment when our elders, now of course my ancestors, said, we're going to establish our community so that white supremacists cannot ignore us. And they were good ancestors, that those generations between the 1840s and the 1860s. And so now, for people to scratch their heads, why are folks voting against their best interest? Aren't they just, all they care about is the fact that Democrats want to kill babies? Well, of course that's all they care about, or that's all they know about the Democrats. Nobody is down there extending a hand to these voters. But even the data, people like to think about data in these questions. They don't just like to think about history and anecdotes. They want to think about data. Even the data shows that these are populations, Black and brown people in rural counties in North Carolina, are your most progressive voters. They're leading the charge in policymaking. They're making solutions happen where in our state house, our state senate, and our national organizations, very little progress is made. So when I think about what's next, my sort of like anybody who listens, I'll say Democrats need a strategy for Robeson County. It's doable. It can happen. You get a group of people together, get your people together, right? Social Movement 101, get your people together, and you can come up with a strategy.
Right.
So I'm done.
Thank you, Malinda.
I'll let Jean go.
Definitely a plan for the future. Jean, I hope Jean didn't leave us because it's.
No, I'm here.
Okay.
Right, I'm here. I'm honored to be here. I told Jill that I'm a writer only in the sort of most marginal sense. These are great writers. And so I asked Jill to at least put an asterisk by my name. There is a different sense in which I am at home here, in that I have been having some challenges with the powers that be in North Carolina and at the university and at the State House for more than a week or two. Well, I was so moved by your piece. Also thinking in that regard, I'm formally asked to let you all know that I don't speak for the University of North Carolina whenever I open my mouth. I'm wondering about that. Now, my theory is that it didn't really seem necessary after they closed my poverty center and closed the civil rights center. I don't think anyone, the real question is whether I'd be allowed to speak at the University of North Carolina, much less for the University of North Carolina. But these are the most crushing of times. I'm going to be quick because I'm sort of out of my league here. I did want to say this. I'm of immensely conflicting emotion. I think probably everybody is. First, it must be said that after starting poorly, I think it appears that last Tuesday's election will deliver the most crucial and democracy-affirming verdict experienced in the United States since 1864. That is a mouthful. It's true, I think. Americans of every pedigree and persuasion defied disease and duress and distraction to rescue their national experiment. Citizens did ultimately what institutions couldn't. I think they've done that. I believe they have. They confronted the budding dictatorship of the vilest president in our history and cast him out. I'd say, back in my tradition, we'd say glory over that, maybe even repeat it. That's the astonishing news on the one hand. On the other, North Carolina, tragically, is a separate matter. Most Tar Heels, it looks like, astonishingly, voted for Donald Trump. Republican lawmakers, yet again, have maintained their wounding lock on the State House. 6 elections running. Political hacks have replaced able and inspiring justices on the state Supreme Court. Republicans made gains in the Council of State races. A grown-up, thoughtful, and effective Democratic governor has thankfully been retained, but he is bound to feel quite lonely. I wanted to say just a word about that. I've been thinking about North Carolina, my sense about North Carolina, my disappointment living in a state that would vote for Donald Trump, living in a state, too, that we all know, we don't talk about it very much, but a state that would launch now for a decade from all white Republican legislative caucuses, the stoutest war against poor people and people of color seen in the United States in the last 50 years. And we would do that, and we would reelect those very folk and move smilingly along the way, which is exactly what we've just done. Astonishing, breathtaking, compact denying. I've been depressed enough about this that I was gonna talk about somebody that I usually talk about when I'm depressed, which is Mrs. Hamer, Fannie Lou Hamer. I'm not gonna do that because I'm in the company of great writers. But I will just say this, we have in North Carolina countenanced, allowed a government which has radically violated the foundations of democratic government. It has waged a war against the constitutional notion of equality. It has set aside, I'm a constitutional lawyer by trade, and constitutional lawyers sort of think this: there's going to be a lot of give and take in our politics. There'll be liberals and conservatives. There will be folks who have certain economic positions, and a lot of give and take, shove, push. But there are a whole slew of givens also. There are things which have taken us centuries to develop. Constitutional limitation, judicial review, democratic equality, political equality. The notion of the 14th Amendment itself passed 150 years ago. We think, and we have historically, that we got all these givens that everyone signs up for. And then you wage the war of politics within those broad rails. What we've had proven to us in North Carolina in the last decade, proven a lot to us, I admit, in Washington the last 4 years, but this is not new to us in this decade. We've had all kinds of folks who've proven to us that they don't buy into those foundations. They don't believe in the notion of constitutional accountability. They don't believe in democratic participation. They don't believe in the rule of law. They don't believe in the traditions of separation of powers. They are willing to cast all of those things aside. In other words, to discard the social compact in order to feather their own political nest. And my point, people of North Carolina have sat back, watched that, allowed it. We raised a lot of hell about it, but the truth of it is it has been conducted from these all-white caucuses, a white people's government in North Carolina, aiming its arrows at the most disadvantaged of our citizens, doing it effectively, trying to out Mississippi, or out Alabama, and we just signed on to it for another term. It's intolerable to me. It massively violates the meaning of North Carolina, the meaning and the American experiment, and we have. I think that the American people have discarded Donald Trump. I hope that's right. God knows. No one's ever called for it more, or that has deserved it more. But the transgressions of the state of North Carolina, the legislature of North Carolina, are of equal import. And we put up with them, and it's to our shame. So I'm glad always to walk with any who are willing to sort of lay themselves on the line in that effort. So thanks for letting me join you today.
Well, thank you, Gene. And I think what Kerry was saying earlier, you don't wait until September, October. This is where we are now. This is where we can go forward. Malinda, the whole outreach to Robeson County, or all of those areas where we know people, have people in our lives that we're connected to. I have to say I was really moved by what Wiley had to say, because I've had that same feeling and also the same realization that this is a period of 4 years in my life that, I have felt a level of vigilance to the point of exhaustion, only to then step back and know that so many people growing up of color, it's a way of life, and the warnings, the precautions, the being on alert for what could happen, and the prejudice. I had a friend remind me that, and she couldn't remember. We're all in a time warp, it seems, COVID making it more so. But she said she remembered me saying in either 2016 or 2017 that I had not felt so vigilant since I had, small children running around while also working and doing many things at once, and I would add to it, it's like if you had 10 of them out swimming in the ocean while you're also responsible for writing letters of recommendation. I cannot get high enough to that level of vigilance. And yet again, I have to acknowledge that it's been 4 years of my life and not a way of living. And I think that some of the silver threads we might pull from this is that it will be very hard to just fall back into this lazy, accepting position. How can we, and I'll knock wood here, but to get to the other side of this, how can we not go forward with a very different point of view and way of thinking of the future? The same with COVID. It's going to be a long time before we're all out there just hugging and kissing and squeezing the way people around here love to do. But it's I hope in that way it's a real positive change in our communities and our lifestyles, that there will be more outreach and awareness. Jean, thank you. I'd love to hear your 2 cents, Jean, about what we can be doing to raise that awareness.
Everybody knows there are powerful and potent ways to make your feelings known in North Carolina. The strength and power of the Moral Monday movement, which has to continue. We miss Reverend Barbara dramatically, but the work has to go on. Here's one thing that seems to me, just trying to put it in perspective, Jill. I think what's happened, even apart from Trump, in the last year and a half, we have a massive health crisis. We have a massive economic crisis. And we hope, begun a permanent re-examination of the horrors of systemic race discrimination in the United States. All of those things have been happening at once. Look, that's hard. It's potent and powerful. But the one positive of it, it seems to me, is the United States for generations has been the richest, the poorest, and the most unequal nation in the world. That's not the way we describe ourselves. It's not the thing that we write on our courthouse walls. But no nation in the world violates fundamental cores of equality as potently as we do. I'm not sure how that could be more dramatically illuminated than these 3 things happening in the United States at the same time. COVID, the recession which comes from it, or the depression, and the horrors of the operation of racial discrimination, particularly in the context of the criminal justice system. To all Americans, to all North Carolinians, it is like we have reached in and opened up these giant chasms. No one can deny it. No one can ignore it in good conscience. The question is, are we going to, what is it? Thomas Piketty wrote just like 3 years ago that the United States is now the greatest economic inequality of any nation, any place on earth, any time in human history. Number one. Now, there's no larger transgression of concepts of equality than the United States. The question is now, given everything we've seen, are we going to put up with that? Are we still going to allow ourselves to be not only the richest, the poorest, and the most unequal, but that also means the most hypocritical nation on the face of the earth? It's impossible to deny it now. The question is whether we're going to try and put our head in the sand once again, or we're going to realize this is our most important challenge, our most important charge, and we make a mockery of everything that we say we teach our children when we allow this to continue.
Can I jump in and say something here that, I don't disagree with anything that James said, but one of the things that strikes me, right, so if you go back through the history, we had Jesse Helms, right? So I lived through Jesse Helms and Sam Urban in my lifetime, Democrats and Republicans. So North Carolina just didn't become this, it's been this. We are unequal, right? And it's this sort of awakening and we've discovered it. And I often say to my students, let's look at North Carolina and don't travel. Let's go from, what did Jim Hunt say, Murphy to Manio was an old campaign slogan, but don't do it on 40, 77, and 85. Go through the back roads and you'll see some of that inequality that we now have discovered has been there in some of these places all along. And it's interesting that we're now in this moment that we discover it. And I hope we don't lose sight of it. I'm afraid that we will. As Malinda said, and some of us have lived this all alone. And in the midst of a North Carolina, an economy that's taken off in this triangle area that I'm in, right? If you, again, just travel not too far. And again, get off of 40 and go the back roads and see the state. You will see some of this has existed for a long time. So I'm hopeful, but I think we need to get beyond these isolated bubbles that many academics we find ourselves in and go and see some of the things that have existed for a long time. And again, this is not new in North Carolina, and that's one of the reasons I'm hopeful, because I do see a distinct change. I do see the mobilization that's possible if we go to work and then get those people who've been left out for a long time.
I don't deny that at all, Kerry. In fact, I spend a great deal of my own time in low-income communities across North Carolina, which is a very potent lesson. But here's one of the lessons that comes from it, which is a little offshoot of what Malinda said. We've learned in North Carolina that there's one thing worse than the long-standing traditional democratic response to poor and marginalized people, which is to ignore them and act like they don't exist. There's one thing worse than that we've learned in the last decade. Poor people can actually be targeted and punished by the legislature intentionally. But that's new, that's worse. But you can't deny, we can't deny the long verdict of North Carolina history, which has ignored the plight of those who had the toughest challenges.
And if I can jump in to what Malinda said earlier, I live in New Hanover County, and after Malinda, while you were speaking, I jumped on to see the election results in the counties. And of course, New Hanover went blue. We still voted primarily Republican for our city council and our state government, but we're surrounded by a sea of red. And I can tell you, I don't go to Robeson County. I don't go to Pender County. When I go on book tour, I go to Chapel Hill, I go to Asheville, I go to Charlotte, I go to Wilmington, Raleigh, Durham, and that's maybe somewhere else, maybe. I don't go to libraries in the far eastern part of North Carolina to do readings, and I should.
We may be calling on you.
Let's do it.
Maybe we'll do a little caravan.
That would be fantastic.
I'm so glad y'all are still here. For some reason, I got kicked out of the party, and I had to.
We should start a caravan called Writers to Register, and we go around the libraries and we hold voter registration drives, and we do readings and donate books.
Wiley, I'm in there. I think that is a wonderful kind of idea. I mean, that kind of movement, again, that kind of awareness that keeps us all involved and tuned into our communities, and not just the community we're living in now, but the community that grew us.
If I could jump in, I would also say, so after 2016, I wish I'd done it before, but after 2016, I took a page out of my friend Del Turner's book. She's a Democratic organizer and school board member in Chatham, and she taught me canvassing, I guess, in 2012. But she registers a lot of people to vote because she carries voter registration forms with her everywhere she goes, in her car, and she just takes them with her in her purse. And so one of the things, I mean, all universities, or most of them that I know of have, they have a lot of the readings that we do are at universities or at libraries or things like that, but they have on campus people whose job it is to provide voter information. And so one of the things that we started doing in our English department is that all of our reading events, we have a table for the voter registration people. And we have voter registration cards and, and things like that. And so I think, asking any bookstore, and bookstores are good about this too, and libraries are, of course, excellent places to get this kind of information, but making sure that there's some announcement or something at any reading you do, any event you do. I would also say that another good resource, just to think positively about North Carolina too, that we have within our state is the Arts Council. And the Arts Council does send a lot of writers and artists around the state to schools are underfunded, terribly underfunded. K-12 schools really need writers. I mean, I think part of the reason that I'm a writer is that we had a young authors program in my school. And I went to a school that was very rural. There wasn't even, where I grew up in Virginia, there wasn't even a library in my county like that you could go to and take books out of. You could just get the books from school. And so and these resources are so important. And these schools are so, there are a lot of reasons our schools need our help. But just a couple of years ago, I was doing this work for the Arts Council in Columbus County. And within a year of working with this one school, an AP English high school class had 3 different teachers because their teachers were going across the border to teach in South Carolina because they could, they could earn more of a living wage in South Carolina than they could in North Carolina. And what we were doing is we were looking at landscape changes that were affected by economic and climate change. And as everybody here from Robeson County and people, as we all know, that's a looming, very bad threat that is waiting for us, that's already here in North Carolina. And that's going to be what our children, what our students are dogged with for their whole lives. So anyway, back to positive. We do have a really great Arts Council, and you can support them. And their grassroots grants are really great, and they put a lot of artists in the schools and give opportunities to kids to learn, to learn the craft.
Exactly. Wonderful. I think we're probably out of time. When I got booted out. I actually thought the whole thing had ended. So I'm so glad you were still here. I mean, it is such an honor to have you guys gathered, such powerful voices, every one of you, writers, every one of you. This whole push for these conversations is under the umbrella of an organization, WAT. You can go to the website, Writers Against Trump, formed now I can't remember how long ago, but anyway, certainly a source of these ongoing conversations, and I think an organization that will continue under that name or something as we do move forward and collect these stories and ideas about how we can take the lessons learned and go forward and really make a difference. And I do think that it always comes down to your home community and what you can do closest to where you are. So Wiley, I love that idea, actually. You know, the caravan there, or, you know, Belle's idea of having those registration cards. I mean, there's so many things. We need to just compile that list and keep it going and spread. But thank you so much. Just such a powerful group. I kept checking to see if there were any questions, and I didn't see any. But
one just popped up.
There's one now.
It's about the 8 p.m. event. The Jill posted the link for the 8 p.m. event earlier, and I will find that. It is in the conversation here. The link for the 8 p.m. event.
Yes.
So
if you go to the writersaginsttrump.org website, it will lead you there with the events. And yes, that starts at 8. And I just want to say again, a huge thank you to Flyleaf for hosting this event. And again, to those, what would we do without our independent booksellers? Speaking of the roots and the arts and the ways that we connect and the network of our community. That was so much the idea behind this organization, because our bookstores and booksellers, like our libraries, provide a network that's just invaluable. Always, but especially these days, it's been just a salvation. So thank you to all of you. Thank you to all who have attended. And I hope we haven't kept you too long. I have enjoyed every minute.
Me too. Thank you, Jill. Fingers crossed.
Thanks for doing this, Jill.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks.